Charles Manson was a cult leader who influenced his followers to commit some of the most horrendous crimes in America. But what caused Charles to turn into the cult-leading monster that he was? Today, we'll be getting a closer look into his past, primarily focusing on his mother, Kathleen Maddox. Hello, everyone. My name is Janine, and you're watching Mothers of Murderers, the Kathleen Maddox story on Now You Know. Kathleen was born on January 11th, 1919, to Charlie and Nancy Maddox in Moorhead, Kentucky. Her mother was a homemaker, and her father, Charlie, worked for B&O Railroad. Kathleen was the youngest of 4 children. She had 2 sisters, Glenna and Eileen, and a brother named Luther. Both of her parents were devoted Christians and raised all of their children to be good, kind, and upstanding citizens. Nancy and Charlie placed strict limits on what the children could do. They weren't permitted to hang out with their friends after school. They had to dress conservatively. They were not allowed to date or even be able to talk to boys. It was normal for them to miss out on things like going to a school dance because they needed to go to church instead. It has been reported that Nancy would discipline the children for stepping out of line. Charlie would step in and comfort the children during these times, but Charlie was working as a conductor, and he wasn't always home to step in when needed. When you constantly push these types of expectations and discipline onto children, eventually they'll start to rebel. Kathleen was one of those who chose to rebel, and she enjoyed it. But she didn't care to deal with the fight and backlash between her and her parents, so at the age of 15, she ran away. Some sources state that Kathleen turned to prostitution. She herself dismissed these claims in an interview with the Charleston Gazette in 1971. She claimed, and I quote, "I wasn't a prostitute. I've never been a prostitute. I was just 15 years old, a dumb kid. I was Miss Dumb. But my mother was a very strict woman, very religious, and did not allow smoking or drinking or even movies. So when me and my sister got a few years on us, I guess we had a tendency to be a little wild, the way kids will." End quote. Her son Charles later stated that his mother was simply looking for acceptance, and therefore she would fall in love rather quickly. However it happened, she found herself pregnant at the age of 16. The father was Colonel Walker Henderson Scott, Sr. of Cattlesburg, Kentucky. He was known to be a local con artist, and he tricked Kathleen into believing he was an actual colonel in the United States military, when in reality, Colonel was his given birth name. When she informed him of her pregnancy, he told her he was going away on Army-related business. A couple months later, she realized he wasn't coming back to be with her or the child. She turned to her parents at this point asking for help. Nancy sent her to Cincinnati to live with her sister for the duration of the pregnancy. During that time, she met and fell in love with a man by the name of William Eugene Manson. The two wed on August 21st, 1934. Kathleen would have been around 6 months pregnant at the time of the wedding. 3 months later, she gave birth to a baby boy at the University of Cincinnati Academic Health Center on November 12, 1934. She did not immediately name the child, as Kathleen felt guilty for the things that she put her own mother through, so she reserved that honor for her mother Nancy to do. Nancy decided to name the boy Charles after her husband. The child was given William's last name, and from that moment on, he would be known as Charles Manson. Despite having the responsibilities of a wife and mother, Kathleen still had a bit of a rebellious streak in her. She continued to drink and carry on disruptively until finally William filed for divorce on April 30th, 1937. Kathleen and young Charles moved back home to live with her parents. There's not much information on the years following the move. Of course, there are stories about how Kathleen once traded young Charles to a waitress for a pitcher of beer, but there is no proof that ever did happen. It was noted that Kathleen was distant. She was not the warm, embracing type of mom. She seemed to shy away from any responsibility. When Charles was about 4 years old, she left him with his grandparents and headed to West Virginia. On August 3, 1939, It was reported that Kathleen and her brother Luther were arrested for hitting a man over the head with a bottle and stealing $35 and the man's car, which they later abandoned. Kathleen served 3 years in prison for the crime. During the time that she was in prison, Charles was sent to live with his aunt and uncle. Again, there isn't much information for this time frame. One can only assume Charles felt very much alone. He did not know much of his real father. His mother didn't seem to care to be around him, and now she was in prison. He was sent from one place to the next, as if a burden rather than a cherished child. By the time that Kathleen got out of prison, Charles was already showing signs of a troubled youth. Charles said the happiest moment he had of his childhood was when his mother was released from jail. It was the one and only time she ever embraced him with a hug. If that is true, it is extremely sad. I'm not looking for excuses for the way Charles turned out, but I am looking for possible reason. I believe rejection and neglect is the true cause. What do you think so far? Let me know in the comments below. While you're doing that, don't forget to hit the like and subscribe buttons as well. Like I said before, once Kathleen was released from prison, Charles was reunited with her. She didn't have a place to stay, so they lived in various hotels for a number of years. Kathleen eventually entered into Alcoholics Anonymous. Whether this was court-ordered or not, I do not know. It is there where she met her second husband, Louis Cavender. Not much is known about Louis, other than the fact that they married in August 1943 and he worked for the railroad. It is speculated that Kathleen was attempting to give Charles a loving home environment by getting married again, but she soon got a taste of her own medicine. You see, Charles had already become a thief and was extremely rebellious himself. He would skip school routinely, and Kathleen was beside herself on how to control him. But I will say her consistent late-night binge drinking did not help things. She either ended up giving up or simply stopped caring. That is, if she ever really cared to begin with. She once again got rid of Charles by sending him to a Catholic school for delinquents when he was 12 years old. Charles fought the system as much as he could, constantly attempting to escape, occasionally being successful. When he was able to escape the school, he would get by committing petty crimes until he was caught and sent back. At one point in 1949, Charles was wanted for stealing. Kathleen was the one who turned him in. According to an article in the Indianapolis News, she appeared not to care as to what would have happened to him, and she happily informed the police of his whereabouts. I'm sure she felt relieved of the burden, knowing he'd be taken away again. That was until police actually arrested her as well for adultery. It is not known for when or for how long or even if she ever served any time for that crime. Eventually, Charles got into enough trouble that he ended up doing serious jail time at a maximum security reformatory in Ohio. He remained there until May of 1954. He was released to live with his aunt and uncle. Again, there's no known information on any interactions between Charles and Kathleen during this time. By 1956, Charles was expecting his first child. He and his wife Rosalie Jean Willis moved to Los Angeles, but did so in a stolen car. Charles was arrested and sentenced to 5 years probation for that offense, but he failed to attend a hearing on an identical charge, and his probation was revoked, and he was sentenced to 3 years imprisonment at Terminal Island in Los Angeles. Now Kathleen steps back into the picture at this point. She moves in with Rosalie to be closer to the prison to visit Charles. In 1957, Rosalie stopped visiting Charles, and Kathleen decided to inform him that Rosalie had left and moved in with another man. This, of course, angered Charles, and he attempted to escape jail once again. This resulted in his parole being denied. It is not clear when he was released, but shortly after he was arrested again for violating his probation and was ordered to serve another 10 years at McNeil Island. Kathleen again followed by moving to Washington State to be able to visit him in jail. At the time, she took on a waitressing job. In 1961, Kathleen and Louis welcomed a little girl they named Nancy, Charles's half-sister. She wouldn't be able to get to know Charles very well, as he was imprisoned until she was 7 years old. There was no known divorce records for Kathleen and Louis, so the ending to that story has been lost to history. Kathleen eventually had married her third husband, Gail Bauer, and was listed to be living in Spokane, Washington on October 21st, 1965. Once Charles was released in 1967, he moved to Berkeley, California to start a new family of his own. From that moment on, there was no known involvement between him and his mother. 2 years later, on August 1969, the Manson family murders took place. Now, after the murders, Kathleen attempted to paint a completely different picture of herself and the relationship she had with Charles. In an interview in 1971, she claimed she spoiled the boy, giving him everything he ever asked for, never holding him accountable for the things that he did. She never enforced rules, regulations, or responsibility on him. If anything, she was a loving, over-nurturing mother. But I would say that there's enough evidence here to contradict her claims. What Charles had to say about his mother was this.
The only thing my mother taught me was that everything she said was a lie. And I learned never to believe anyone about anything.
Sadly, I agree with him. Kathleen passed away on July 31st, 1973, at the age of 55. The cause of death was a stroke. Now it is time to place Kathleen on the Mothers of Murder's Best Mom scale. This was a hard one to do. Clarnell and Kathleen seemed to be equally horrible as far as neglect, but Clarnell was physically and mentally abusive, although it was speculated that Kathleen was as well, but there's no known evidence to support that. So I would have to say Kathleen was just ever so slightly a better mom than Clarnell. Louise is still holding the best mom spot. Do you know of any other mothers of murderers who you feel was a better mom than Louise Bundy? Let me know in the comments. And if you're interested in their stories, you can find them here. Until next time, take care, stay safe, and thanks for listening.